Welcome to WatchTalk. My name is Daniel, this is Renaissance Watches. And today we have a very special guest. We have Constanteyn. Constanteyn is a freelance writer and also a watch enthusiast, and he's also experienced in writing about watches. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, it's always great to talk about our great hobby. So, yeah.
First and most important question, what are you wearing today on your wrist?
Today on my wrist is my IWC Mark XVI Spitfire edition, so the silver dial instead of the black dial. Reference number 3255. It's been on my wrist almost continuously since I got it, so yeah, it's a great little watch.
It's nice. It's like a little bit like between formal and a little bit more modern, I guess.
It's a very versatile watch. You can dress it up with a NATO strap to really bring out the military heritage of this watch. Or when I bought it, it came on a black alligator strap, which looks very sophisticated, like a very nice office watch or a nice dress watch when you pair it with black shoes. And now I'm dressing more casual, and I have it on a brown leather strap, which is perfect for what I wear daily. Yeah, so it's a very versatile little piece.
Yes, that's very nice. Could you maybe introduce yourself a little bit for the viewers, give a short introduction, but for people that are not familiar with you?
So my name is Constanteyn Roelofs. I'm a freelance writer. I write mostly about finance, but also in part of my job is writing about luxury, so cars, boats, sometimes watches, anything that gets our hearts racing in our time away from the office, but also in my finance, sort of my day job. I also come into contact with a lot of people who are deeply into the hobby and have, of course, the means to indulge in the passion. So it's always nice to spot a fellow enthusiast and strike up a conversation about well, the watch they're wearing, the watch they want to get, the watches they have.
That's great. Of course, we also met as enthusiasts. But like, I don't even know, how did you like get into the hobby? How did you get interested?
Well, the first time I got into watches was when I was 7 years old. I was visiting Geneva with my parents. Friends of my parents lived in Geneva at the time. And we were strolling around the city, and I saw this watch with my name on it, Constanteyn, of course. So I was like, Dad, can I have a watch like that? And, well, I couldn't, because Watchable Constanteyn, of course, is was a little bit out of my price range when I was 7 years old, no job yet. But my parents got me a very nice watch. My first watch was a flick-flux watch. I think many collectors started off on a
same.
Yeah, so that was the first time I really got into watches, because I went to Switzerland, and of course that's like one of the two first things you know about Switzerland. They got mountains, they got watches, and they got purple cows making milk chocolate. So that was my first introduction, and then I sort of got back into the hobby when I started writing about finance, and saw more people around me wearing nice watches, and so got sort of back into the to caring about them, sort of wearing them again. I of course had, like many other people, a long time I didn't wear anything special, just mainly relied on my phone for the time. And then I got more into writing about watches as well for one of my clients, and got really bitten by the bug, so to speak. Visited watch factories, watch dealers, worked with vintage dealers, and yeah, so of course that's how sort of the ball started rolling again for me. Yeah,
that's amazing. So how long ago was it that you got back in?
About 4 or 5 years ago, I would say. Yeah. So I started, the thing we all do. Go online, buy stuff at auction, sometimes at 2 in the morning. Another DHL package showing up. So I started, developing a bit of a taste for things, try out what works, what doesn't, what fits my wrist, what doesn't. Because, as you know, you can only learn about watches so much online, but to really experience them, you have to wear them. Sometimes wear them for more weeks at a time. I don't think you can be like a wine expert in your first 1,000 bottles, or know women after your first 10 girlfriends. You have to, you have to sort of get more experience, get more practice, wear more stuff. So there was a big, selection of Seikos, Omegas, tried watches from friends. Some of my friends have much nicer watches than I do. So, and eventually, we're at this point now. I think I have a little bit better grasp on what I like in a watch and how I would structure my sort of collection and how it interplays with my daily life and my the sort of things I do, the things I wear, the style I'm comfortable in. So yeah.
So how did it develop? Where did you start and where are you now with what you want in a watch?
Well, I started off, of course, buying all these weird things and raiding my dad's little drawer with his old watches, and that's where I got this one, by the way. We'll come to this in a moment. And sort of ballooned to maybe 6, 12 pieces at a time, and now I've cut back to 3, which I mostly wear. And I think, of course, in watch collecting we have this thing called the 3-piece collection, so I think I boiled it down to a nice 3-piece collection I sort of brought today, maybe we can talk about. So try to form a very coherent, very functional and a very diverse group within a very small range of only 3 watches. I mean, the Germans have a saying, like in the Beschränkung zeigt sich der Meister, that in the sort of the confines is where you can show your true ability. And I think if you structure a collection along a few clear and simple rules, you can come to a very satisfying and a very enjoyable collection, which doesn't lead to a problem which I have, because I'm a very indecisive person. I get stressed when I look at a big watch box with like 20 watches, and I get anxiety to choose. So for me, it works best to have like 3 watches and in a rotation, and I would say it's a 3D strategy. I say you have your daily, your dress, and a digital. The daily is, of course, where you put the thing you wear the most. I think for many people, a very good daily would be something like maybe a Rolex Datejust, or stainless steel, no complications, very versatile in strap-wise. Omega, of course, makes a lot of things like that as well. Aquaterra, maybe a diver. And then, when I go rock climbing or in the sea or backpacking, that's where I don't want to wear a nice watch, so I got my little G-Shock, GWM 5610, which is for me, it's the classic G-Shock shape. It's a very interesting and iconic design. I also look for certain iconic designs, of which the G-Shock is, of course,
yes,
one of the archetypes. But this one has all the modern things like the satellite, not the satellite, but the radar, time setting. It has the solar. It's very tough. I've worn this for years and done all kinds of crazy stuff with it, and it still looks today it came out of the box. That's my digital. I think that every collection should have a G-Shock.
I agree. I even though I'm like a vintage guy, I also have a G-Shock. I also think it's pretty funny, like you say, the 3-piece collection for me is like in my mind a myth for me personally, because I could never get to it. You can see I have a few of my watches here.
Yeah,
it's more than 3. But I like the concept. But I think for some people it works.
Yeah.
For me, it does not work because I want to wear a lot of different watches.
Yeah. Well, for me personally, I get to wear like test watches or visit boutiques, visit dealers, and that's where I can get my kicks, so to speak, in the variety. And I think, to have just one watch you can strap on in the morning is something that brings me a lot of peace of mind. So I'm maybe not a classic collector in that sense, but I think this IWC fits the role perfectly for a daily watch. For me, the young timer watch world, like say from the early 80s when sapphire crystals were introduced until the introduction of the mobile phone, for me that's sort of the most interesting category to buy your daily watch, since that's before like the prices started inflating and watches started to become a pure luxury object after the introduction of the iPhone, and after like watches were sort of that. I think manufacturing entered a new stage in the early 80s. I think that the machining got a lot better. The durability of watches got a lot better through sapphire crystals, for instance. So if you want to have a watch that's not too expensive but has character and heritage before the cynical marketing age, but also the like anti-magnetic properties and sapphire crystals, I think the young timers are really where the value is at. A lot of fun and collecting is from the young timers.
I do think there indeed, like neo vintages people also call it. There's like quite a lot of value. Yeah. Personally, like for example, I'm wearing like something very different than I normally wear, a Seamaster 120. Which is like a diverse, like from 1968. But like for me, personally, I've never like had severe damage to watches. Maybe it's also like I have a desk job, so you know, it's like it doesn't see any water or anything where it's actually needed. But if you I do agree that if you really care about like its properties to have ease of mind, then it makes sense. But in my personal experience, I never had any trouble with any of my watches, even from the 30s or 40s.
I mean, I've had vintage watches which serve me very well, and I think vintage is a very enjoyable part of the hobby. I had a couple of very nice Corteberts, which are very sort of forgotten brands, maybe. Underrated, and things like the vintage Constanteyn Roelofs watch at Perseo, also Cortebert in disguise actually, but no, this is what I have at the moment, and that's purely to stop myself from stressing in the morning while dressing.
That's a fair point. You're talking about like underrated watches, right? One of the reasons why I started like Renaissance watches is to basically make more accessible underrated watches, right? Because it can be kind of, especially in vintage, it can be kind of difficult to really know if you're buying a good product. So I'm curious, like you've quite a lot of different watches, you've worn a lot of different watches, but what to you are some underrated watches? Can be both modern, vintage?
Well, I think Cortebert, the brand we mentioned, maybe here in the Netherlands, Longines is also a brand that's not very well known. Maybe in Italy it's a bit more collectible. I think interest in it is rising. I see Omega Dynamic here on the table. I think Omega did a lot of interesting work with the Dynamic series, also through the 90s with the chronograph and stuff, which are picking up a little bit more speed, but it still are not in the same league as say the Speedmaster. Or I think many manufacturers, especially during the 80s, 90s, tried to bring out all these new series that I tried to replace their old flagships with. For example, the Omega Dynamic series, they tried to step away a little bit from the Seamasters of old. Didn't really work because apparently the staying power of the classics was too great. What else is very underrated? I think pocket watches in general. I think if you really get down to it, the canvas on which you can paint your mastery as a watchmaker in a pocket watch. It's a larger canvas, it's more visible, it's more easily accessible. I mean, you can flick it open with your nail. And I think there are some movements in the market to move a bit more towards pocket watch appreciation. At some small online pockets of the interest. But I think we haven't really solved the problem yet how to integrate pocket watches in a world where we don't wear vests with pockets.
Yes, I agree.
And I think that's a shame because if you look at a brand like IWC, their late 19th century, early 20th century pocket watches, their 1920, 1930 pocket watches, they're so beautiful. Just the mastery of metal, the Art Deco pocket watches especially achieve the sort of something I really associate with IWC, by the way, is this sort of perfect integration between legibility, design, and the integration of case and movement. And I think they're and you can pick them up for like €2,000, and I think that's for a full build one. And that's something that's maybe the market's catching up to that. But I think if you're interested in the purely mechanical side of things, then pocket watches are they're also very interesting because if you buy like a couple of pocket watches from say the range mid 19th century until they really went out of style, so probably Second World War, I would say.
Yes.
You can sort of see in the metal the transition from the old cylinder watches with 5 jewels to the full 17 jewel or more. You can see the technology developing decade by decade by decade.
Yes.
So if your collection strategy is to include the sort of an evolution of what it is to make a watch, then I think pocket watches are something you can have a lot of fun with. I would say that. Yeah.
I agree with you. There's so much history. Like for me, if you have talk pocket watches, one that is very underrated is like H. Moser.
Yeah.
I didn't bring it, but I have like a pocket watch from before the Russian Revolution, because of course then they had to flee back to Switzerland. But they were so important for Russian history. Like throughout the Silk Roads, basically were traded, and they were like even in books like from let's say Dostoevsky. They were used as this pinnacle of what it means to be successful, which like for some people like Rolex or Patek is nowadays. In the old literature and old like Russian culture at the time, this was such an important icon. And they are like for sure even cheaper than we were talking about IWC watches. So it's and there are many like Zenith pocket watches are also very important, I think, historically. But
and what do you think about American Rolex pocket watches?
Yes.
I mean, we tend to think of watchmaking as something Swiss or maybe Japanese, but the biggest watch factories in the world in the 19th century were these American pocket watch factories, and they made beautiful, beautiful stuff. Also on the Russian, I was reading the biography of Catherine the Great and Yuri Potemkin, Simon Seebeck Montefiore book, in which Catherine the Great at some point berates Potemkin that his mother doesn't have a watch, and so she gives Potemkin's mother a watch because how could a woman of her standing not have a watch? So that's the social side we were talking about.
I think also watches were like at the time more worn by women than by men. In that time period.
I don't think so. No. But I think it's today we see watches as a very sort of masculine pursuit. It's very much a guy thing, and I think in the 18th century, I think there was a bit more of an equality in there, and I think that's something the hobby could use more of.
I do agree. Like I have read somewhere that especially when France and England were still very dominant in watchmaking before the Swiss era, that it was kind of more of like a thing that women wore a lot. But maybe there's a dispute on that. It's not my expertise. This pre-Swiss era, but I think
I think the thing is that if you wear, I think if you go back to the 18th century, before the great renunciation of male fashion culture, because before everything went black, all the suits were like silk and embroidered, and to be like dressed in the 18th century was a very complicated affair. You had a lot of patterns and silks and stockings, and I think dress was as complicated for men as for women. And I think both male and female dress included a watch, at least if you were part of the upper echelons of society, or the people that try to be. Because of course you get a lot of middle class imitation of what courtly culture was. But I don't think there was any difference in the percentages or the amount of people wearing watches. I think it was pretty universal across the board.
Which pocket watch did you bring? Was it a pocket watch? But I also see one on the table.
It's a chronometer Supra. I think it's a local watch here from Amsterdam. I think it's a house brand of a jeweler.
Can I?
Yeah, sure. I should take it in for service. It's not running very well at the moment.
Very beautiful. It's also very good condition, I would say.
Yeah, it's a 9-carat golden case. Very classic Breguet hands, very Breguet numerals. I think there's a Cortebert movement in it. Just some decoration, but not very good. And the way this watch came to me is that I'm from a large Catholic family, and my dad's aunt was the housekeeper of a Roman Catholic priest, and he got this watch as a present when he was consecrated as a priest.
Oh, yeah.
And at that point, this watch was already a couple of decades old. I think this is from the early 20th century. And it was before he wore it. It was worn by another priest in the family, say. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's like a watch you would wear somewhere inside a robe. So you're yeah.
That's a beautiful history. So I can. That's also to me what makes watches very interesting, especially when you have this tied to previous generations, previous history.
Yeah, and that's of course you have that a lot more with like a watch like this than say G-Shock maybe.
Yes.
But that's why I always say if you have like a 3-piece collection, you have your digital, you have your daily, and go for dress, you can maybe have like your grandfather's watch or a watch that has a little bit more meaning. I see you your IWC over there.
Yeah.
Is it the one you got married in? That's of course a watch you will never get out of your collection.
Exactly. This is I think in general, not only like pocket watch from IWC, but also these early caliber 88 and 89. Like were very, very important calibers at the time. Yeah. Like the highest conditions you could get at that point. It's beautiful watches, and they're like between 2,000 and 3,000 euros approximately for full gold case.
Yeah,
I think it's very amazing.
Yeah. It's a beautiful piece. Yeah.
I'm also curious because we were talking about unrated watches, but what if you would make a 3-piece collection of let's say unrated watches, so the daily, the digital, and your dress, what would you buy?
Well, what's an underrated digital watch? I don't know. Well, maybe some like you have these weird and wonderful 1980s Seikos with like the traditional clock face and digital underneath that. You know, these are very fun. Maybe even like a Hamilton LED.
Oh yes,
that's a very weird digital watch.
They were more daring at the time, I think. There was this, just like you were saying about the dynamic, like it's very different from stables like Seamasters, Constellations, and that's why I don't wear it so much myself. Personally, I think it's a fun watch to have. It's not something you wear every day for me personally. But they were more daring, and I think it's coming back a little bit now that they try to be more daring.
Yeah, and for the dress, I would go for the maybe IWC again. We circle back to it, but they have this Portofino Romana perpetual calendar. The 36mm. Everybody associates IWC, of course, with big watches. Very small, well, relatively small, and it's one of the most legible, most beautiful perpetual calendars. And of course, it's also a testimony to Mr. Kurt Klaus, legendary designer of IWC, who tried his best to shrink down the perpetual, reduce by I think maybe 150 components, and made it all operatable by the crown. So it's a very very beautiful complication. That's probably what I would get for a dress watch. As an underrated daily watch, maybe back again to what we were earlier talking about, these like these railroad watches. Like I had one, the Italian, the Perseo. I think Seiko made a couple. They're very beautiful, very legible, very useful for daily wear, I would say. So that's probably one avenue I could go in for something like that. Yeah.
Very, very cool. I think these are watches that you would almost hear nobody say specifically. Everybody has their own definition of underrated and also their own, I guess, focus point of attention. I think it's very nice.
Yeah.
So I'm also like curious, like of course besides like collecting watches, like you said you also write about watches. Yeah. How does this influence like how you look at watches?
I think when you write about watches, you have to sort of be an intermediate between what the company tries to sell and what the vision is of the product that the designers and the marketeers try to put forward, and also how the market reacts to it. And I think it's also very important to, I think one of the questions we were maybe coming up to later, but we talk about how it is to be a watch content creator in 2023. I think there's a couple of lines you can take. One is to be like very personal and just talk from your own perspective. And I like this, and my primary reaction to this watch is like this. A lot of YouTube creators do this. But there's also like a more educational aspect to maybe it's like writing about fine wine or fine cigars, like you have your tasting notes, like I taste some herb and some leather and some, coffee notes in the, and I think you can do that with watches as well to draw the attention to whatever the watch is presenting, and sort of not to be too much influenced by what the marketing spin is, but try to work out what works, what doesn't. I think a lot of great watches are let down by very specific details that, for instance, things like when you create date windows or full patina loom and stuff like that. It can really grate on you when you look at a watch from that sort of perspective. It's a different experience than when you have to be like a personal, when you buy a watch for yourself or when you're an individual consumer. Because then you have to fit the watch into your whatever else your life is and what else your style is or your body type or things like skin color. I mean, I have a pretty, skin that doesn't really look good with gold, so I wouldn't go for like a full gold watch, but some other people may, But that you should, try to look things out of context, but also in a different context, not for a specific wearer, but more in like, where does this fit into the history of the brand, direction of the brand, general trends in culture, and also you have to write entertaining, because that's that's almost a thing to be enjoyed in itself, the writing itself. I mean, there are a lot of people who watch, people like from the Grand Tour or Top Gear, like Hamilton, May, and Clarkson, not because they're into cars, but they like the dynamics of the show and the jokes and the banter, even though they're not car people at all. And I think if you are a good watch writer, you can make the content enjoyable for people who like just good writing and not per se watches.
I think that's what we've seen over the last few years, right? But also with like social media becoming more dominant, we see kind of change in content.
Yeah.
Also, many more people coming into the hobby, be more aware of it.
Yeah.
Where do you see that the space is going from like a writing perspective, like from where it was a few years ago till now?
I think the sort of online ecology of some very high quality watch blogs has given space to things that couldn't be explored a couple years ago. I mean, if you have a specialist magazine, yes, you can run more in-depth articles, but you can't run like some people do. I think Jack Forster is a very good example of somebody who can easily write 10,000 words on the history of atomic clocks. And that was, it's not big enough for a book. It's too large to do in a print magazine, but you can put it all out online. And I think that's a very good thing. I think it also, the more epigrammatic style of, say, an Instagram or something has also its own. But I think the whole flex culture, Instagram watch world is something completely different from what would be watch blogs, watch forums. But I think it's not a question of replacing, but more like broadening the scope, because everything can exist at the same time. Because
But don't you think it also influences each other? Or my perspective is that, for example, Instagram flex culture has really influenced also how people, let's say, watch for how they perceive watches, because a lot of new people come in through this point of the hobby.
Yeah, it's true. That's true, and I think maybe the narrowing of the focus to certain specific Rolexes. I mean, if you look back to what used to be Rolex collecting, maybe 30 years ago, it was all about bubble bags and stuff like that.
Yes.
And nobody pays any attention to bubble bags at all at the moment. And, or like the Princes, the rectangular ones. And I think the hobby has lost a lot of its sort of charm because of that. Well, maybe that's weird for me to say because I wasn't in the hobby for a long time, but I think, and sort of the general interest that I think people get into the hobby through like flex culture, and then discover there's also things like weird J.Le Coulters and stuff you can collect. So yeah,
that's I do think indeed there's like this kind of balance that we need to find to basically get. It needs to be entertaining, and of course it can be like pop culture, but it also needs to be in some way, at least I feel like, it needs to have this line with the past and the future.
Yeah.
It cannot only be about this like hedonistic kind of way of look at my great watch, I have a lot of money. And so I'm curious, how do you think that like content creators have like an influence on this? Like what can they do to influence this culture towards some charm that your opinion, like, and also my opinion, kind of got lost a little bit.
Well, I think it's very if you take a more reflective role, that what you automatically do if you are into things like history, like patina, like the interaction between social settings and material culture, that's in some ways very antithetical to the idea of this is what is cool now, this is what I flex now. But I think if you really try to reconstruct certain moments or certain social interactions or certain cultural currents through the medium of writing, you can also you can have some influence on collecting. I think one of the biggest examples of that is William Gibson, a famous cyberpunk writer who is also a crazy watch nut. He wrote this big essay for Wired magazine at some point about watch collecting, and the endless trolling through eBay and the sort of connection between it. I mean, I think he landed at some point on Gilles military watches at some point as his focus of collection, because the sort of intersection of design and history and that sort of stuff. And I think that because these resources are out there, and his novels like All Tomorrow's Parties, where watches are central to the plot point, I think they influence a certain percentage of the population, for instance, in the popularity of certain military watches. And I think that there's a market, at least, for people who think that sort of provenance and that sort of these weird little mechanical distressed by time machines in a very, very rapidly digitizing age. I think it's very hard to capture that feeling, but because it has been captured by writers like Mr. Gibson, I think that has influenced a certain part of, if you, for instance, look at maybe watch blog like Modinky, where one of the guiding principles they set out for their historical watches are also all these matters of provenance and patina and like the lack of polishing and that sort of stuff. That's something what I think emerged from a sort of different way of thinking about watches, which was expressed through certain writers. Because before, when you had had like a vintage watch, you would restore it and not leave the patina there.
Yes, it needs to be as new as possible.
Yeah, and I think that has changed, and I think that's why watches that have been polished and come with like the box and papers and stuff like that have a bit more appeal in the market than they used to have. And I think that's a cultural shift that is either being described or being proscribed by certain people with a leading voice in the industry. But it's always very hard to tell in these cultural things where the proscription begins and the description begins. That's there's a feedback loop in the process.
Yes, yeah. I agree. I'm curious then. Like last conversation I had was with Timo from Whistler, and he asked me a question for you when I told him that you would be the next one to interview. Yeah. What's like the kind of subject that writers, including yourself, could or should write about to have like a positive influence on the watch market? So something that's not written a lot about.
That's a very good question. It's very easy to, when writing about watches, to focus in on certain aspects, like pick a model line, pick a movement, and then focus in on, this is an in-house movement, and take the watch apart in its parts, and then go write about it. You sort of lose focus of what makes a watch a sort of integral unit and a collectible and an enjoyable thing. And I think that has led to a focus on snobbery and on things that are very easy to measure but are very meaningless. Like limited number of productions, or like, oh, there's only 500 of the Rolex with this dial, so this is a very collectible watch. Yeah, but does it work? I mean, for instance, what the Rolex Starbucks,
yes,
with the black dial and the green bezel, right? That's Starbucks, right? Is it?
Yes. yeah, I think so.
I think that's a watch that's very big in collecting circles, and people poo-ah over it because it's such a rare thing. But for me, that wouldn't be a collectible watch, because the unity of design is broken by having this ugly bezel, ugly bezel dial combination. Yeah.
So you're saying basically that rarity for such things are not, or kind of overhyped a little bit. Also,
well, it's easy to hype the watch because it has this distinguishing characteristic. Mm-hmm. But it breaks what makes a Submariner for me. I mean, the Submariner is no doubt about one of the best designs in the world. It's the most imitated thing in the world. So by that measure, it's maybe the design. But if you break that, for instance, by making it gold with a blue dial, for me that breaks the authenticity of the piece, and the collectability for me is not there. But in collector circles, that's exactly what makes it collectible.
It's like a paradox that makes it like, it makes no sense, so it makes sense, basically.
Yeah, and I think the watch market is driven by economic dynamics that aren't necessarily make the enjoyment of the wearing of the piece. Also, the trend against redials, or the trend against hands that have been replaced. Well, sometimes that's just part of the story of what makes a watch, and if it just has this certain like beat up quality about it, or has the traces of the history, you can make a much more easily, much more enjoyable piece to wear. But it's a harder piece to sell, and I think to educate maybe the reader or the viewer on YouTube to look a bit more for the what makes something a truly enjoyable piece, otherwise than meaningless facts. Mm-hmm. Like say, I mean, for instance, the whole thing about in-house movements is just, it's one of these weird things. At some point it entered the salesman jargon, and now factories are, bending over backwards to claim in-house movements, even though, for instance, Tudor has this factory, the Knisi one, with Chanel and all these other kind of brands, and they still say, well, it's in-house. Well, it's a shared factory. It's not in-house. And they do things like, make the Black Bay Pro with an in-house GMT, and just like the GMT module on an existing caliber, which makes for a very thick watch. If they just went for an ETA with a GMT function, they could have shaved a couple of millimeters and have a more beautiful product. But they didn't, because they probably some marketing told them, well, you can only sell them if you claim the movement is in-house.
I think the problem maybe is that, like, we were talking about like previous eras before the phones came up, where it was not purely luxury. No. And if you want a luxury product, then for some people, there's no practical use of a watch. You can always see the time like more accurately and cheaper on your phone. Yeah. I think people are looking for meaning, and I personally think that the only way to find the meaning is first of all to look at, like you said yourself, what made watches significant in the past, and not like try to make something new. But playing devil's advocate, I would say there's also part of that is also creating your own kind of movements, right? There's a reason why, if you just have like a ETA movement, why people don't like that. Why would you pay so much money for something that they did not put the same effort in to create that product? So then you could also say, in that case, that maybe the definition of in-house is more of the problem. But I do think if you're a serious watchmaker in that sense, and you as a watch maison, you want to produce real like watches, then just having all the same generic watches is not putting the same amount of effort in years of like development.
Yeah, but the thing is, say you would have the choice between a badly integrated in-house movement and a watch that, the movement is too small for the case, the hands aren't matching up with the dial, the date window is off, or a very well integrated, like say, old Patek Philippe's that used ébauché movements.
Oh, yes.
I think I would rather have Patek Philippe, which has a Je le Coultre movement finished to a very high standard and integrated in a very beautiful product, then have say something that is in-house, like I think Tissot is a very big offender on this one. A 43mm watch with a 11 linear movement, that's with a plastic spacer. That's but I think a big challenge for the industry is how to create beauty value products with integrity in this sort of cynical marketing age, especially with these after the big consolidation of a lot of watchmakers in all these luxury houses, in the Louis Vuitton group and stuff like that, and Kering and whatever all these groups. Yeah. I think that the luxury people that used to selling handbags at 10 times inflated prices got their hands on watchmakers and put all the same business practices from the handbag industry into the watchmaking industry, and I think that's and there's a reaction to this, of course. There's all these micro brands. There's Seiko also probably goes its own way. Some Swiss manufacturers are independent, but I think that the general watch market is just poisoned by the general luxury culture, and that's why I think if you are a serious watch collector, I mean, one of the questions on your list was what's not watch collecting, what people think is watch collecting.
Yes, yeah.
And I think if you have like a box with like 10, 12 current day hype watches, like you have your Speedmaster, you have your Hulk, you have your I think serious watch collecting is always about historical watches, mostly about finding these pieces that are that have in some way some historical integrity, and that's very hard to do now. So yeah,
it's also very hard because you mentioned the Speedmaster. Speedmaster is one of those watches, of course, that is historically significant.
Yeah.
So it makes it also difficult to find kind of the information you need. What makes a watch not just iconic but historically significant, and have integrity. When you see everybody wearing a Speedmaster, and I think you see this also with the collaborations with Swatch, with Adams, with the Speedmaster. You see, like you said yourself, that marketing is very important, more over substance.
Yeah.
But what would you advise collectors who are kind of looking maybe to go this different route, but have a difficult time finding the right information?
Well, I think the information is sort of out there. It's very fragmented. First of all, I think you have to educate yourself on certain terms of collecting. I think that should be your basis. Like you should know what a patina is, and you should know what an ébauché is, and what all the different case shapes and the numerals, and that I think that's one of the bases of the hobbies. And I think there are very good resources for that. Lots of things on YouTube. I think YouTube is a great resource. You can lose hours in it. And then I think maybe also a sort of form of self-knowledge and go really because your stuff in yourself is also in constant dialogue with who you are as a person and what your values are, what your style is, what makes you happy, what makes you tick, maybe to throw a shit joke out there. And I think, in fact, practice is a good way to, go to meetups, talk about friends with watches, always be sort of generous in a way that, you learn mostly by people saying, hey, you want to try my watch on, and just be not in a snobby way, but just point them to the nice details or the story behind it. And yeah, just go online and buy a bunch of stupid stuff. I think that's a big part of the education. Is
So if I can summarize basically what we've been saying in this conversation, it's really about kind of this journey of self-exploration in a sense, and by self-exploration what you like and your experience and connecting that to the past, basically experience of other people, basically that is also the way forward, I guess, into the future.
Yeah, I think with a lot of things in life, that it's just something that has to get a little bit into your system, and you have to buy a couple of watches you don't really like, or when you look back at them for a couple of months later, oh, why did I ever buy this piece?
Well, what's a watch that you bought like this?
And I bought it, and it's a very enjoyable watch. It's a nice product, especially for the price. It's really crazy they can make it for that kind of money. But I couldn't sort of. I have a hard time to bond with new watches, and I know this for myself. And I was like, and I still bought it. And I did it. I could move it fairly quickly after a couple of weeks. But that's I think part of the education. And also sometimes like, what does it say about yourself that you are very sensitive to certain external pressures, maybe? Like when you find yourself looking at Rolexes, even though you're sworn you're not a Rolex guy, but you are in like a meeting with 5 people with Rolexes, and you're like, oh, I'm missing out. I'm the odd one in the group because I don't have a Rolex. Yeah. I think that's sort of maybe character forming. That's sort of things. Yeah.
Thank you so much for also your view today. I have a final question. The next person that I'm going to interview is like Frank from Monogram.
Mm-hmm.
What's the question you would like me to ask him?
You stop yourself from becoming cynical in the face of these of all the sort of fakeness and the fake history and the very recherché parts of watch marketing, where everybody's trying to look for an astronaut in their back catalog or a deep sea explorer. How to not to become cynical and keep the flame of the hobby alive in the face of so many very cliche-matic and frankly badly done marketing. That's my question.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
This was WatchTalk from Renaissance Watches. See you next time.